What was Desiree doing, trying to drag her back into a life she no longer wanted? You gotta go in there like somebody they tell things to, he said. Somebody that gets what she wants. Be white, you mean? He nodded. Easier that way, he said. I can't go in with you, give you away. But you just go in, say you looking for somebody, an old friend. Not your sister. That'll raise too many questions. Tell him you lost touch, something like that. Just keep it light, breezy, like a white lady with no worry on her mind. So she imagined herself as Stella, not the Stella she once knew, but Stella as she was now, pushing past the giant MB door handles, stepping inside the department store. She passed through the perfume aisle with the confidence of a woman who could buy any bottle she wished. She stopped to smell a few as if she was considering a purchase. Glanced at the fine handbags, demurred when sale girls approached her. In the lobby, the colored elevator operator gazed at the floor when she stepped on. She ignored him, the way Stella might have. She felt queasy at how simple it was. All there was to being white was acting like you were. Greetings, Darcy Planner. That's from page 89 of a book I have just been bursting to tell you about called The Vanishing Half. And I want to show you the cover because it's really stunning. Oh, it vanished. There it is again. The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. And I read this book a couple of weeks ago, and I've been thinking about it ever since. So it took me probably 4 days to read, and that involves just bringing it into everything. I was sneaking it into meal times. I was waking up early to read it. I was staying up way past my bedtime to read all of the things. And friends, I've been really wanting to talk to you about this book. It feels like a very big book that you can't really contain all by yourself. You need other people to discuss it with. It feels too much to contain all within yourself, and that it's a book that you need to discuss with other people, to read with other people, to reread with other people. It just really feels like I've witnessed something incredible by reading this book. And again, it's been a couple of weeks since I've read it. I think about it every single day, and I feel the way I feel only occasionally when I read books, that I like the pieces of me have actually fit together differently. I felt that way when I read A Place for Us by Fatima Farheen Mirza. I felt that way when I read The Beauty of Your Face by Sahar Mustafa most recently. I feel this way about this book. I felt that way about Americana. There's certain books that come across every so often, and you feel like you've witnessed not just another book, but something magical that's going to stay with you for a long time. And so I want to tell you about it. And this book was published on June 2nd, 2020, and I like to think that I'm up to date with new releases, but this was unusual even for me. Like, I read it a week after it released. I got really lucky with the library hold system, and so this feels like a very current review. And I want to talk about the plot, and I also want to tell you about some of my takeaways. So this book is about two sisters, Desiree and Stella, who are twins, and they grew up in a very small southern community, a community that is so small it doesn't even show up on a map. This is a town that really values light skin. And on the first page it says, no one in Mallard, that's the name of the town, marries dark. And so you know that there's something interesting going on in this place. The twins are very light, and they have an ancestor, like a great-great-grandfather, I forget exactly where in their lineage he is, who founded the town and had a dream that his offspring would be lighter and lighter with each successive generation. And that ancestor had a father who, the book says, owned him and was his father. And race is very much a part of the logic of that town, the operation of that town, all of the things. And these particular two girls, when they are younger, their father is murdered in front of them. And I'm telling you, these aren't really spoilers. You find this out very early on in the novel. And their father is murdered by a group of white men who attack him, and then when he's in the hospital, come back and sort of finish the job. And when he's attacked the first time, the girls are in the closet witnessing this act. And so this event, not only being tragic, changes their lives. Their mother, who is from a lineage in the town that is very significant, then has to go and clean houses. The girls who have dreams of lots of different things, like Stella, the one sister, wants to go to college and pursue her education, cannot do that. And when they're 16, they leave school and they have to join their mother as well. And so when they're 16, they leave town, they run away from home, and they go to New Orleans. And when the book opens, it's 1968. Desiree, one of the sisters, is back, and she has a child with her. So several years have passed. She's not with her sister. And you find out that when they're in New Orleans, Stella runs away from her sister after some time. And when she comes back to Mallard in 1968, she hasn't seen her sister in the intervening years. And Desiree is seeing her mother after all these years. And so the book is about these two sisters. So it's a book that comes from different points of view. It spans their lives, their relationships, their children, and it goes through different decades. So if you like multi-generational family sagas, you will love this book for that reason. And so that's what the plot of the book is about. And what I want to do now is kind of tell you a bit about my takeaways. And I'd love to hear, if you've read this book, what you were taking from it as well. And so one of the things I loved about this book was, this book obviously was written not in the past couple of weeks. It was started a long time ago. But we are in a moment that for many people has been a long time. But I think this is a moment of like a real collective reckoning about race in some ways. I've certainly seen more widespread discussion of race in the past several weeks than I have in any other moment I can recollect. So we're in a moment where a lot of people are thinking about race, and a lot of the ways people are learning and thinking about race are through nonfiction books, and which is awesome, and you can see that in the New York Times bestseller lists and all kinds of bestseller lists. But fiction does something different. Fiction is a way to gain empathy for characters, to understand issues in a different way, to activate your heart and your emotions, to understand an issue in a way that nonfiction simply doesn't open up for you. And recently, like I read Red at the Bone. If you watched my last video, I talked about Jacqueline Woodson's book, Red at the Bone. And in that book, she talks about the Tulsa Massacre, which is an event I've never heard about. And reading about it in a fiction book opened my heart up to be more aware of that event. So one, the reason to read this book is it is just a way to think about race that nonfiction books will not give you necessarily. And so this book's really asks the question, what is race? We know race is a construct, it's socially constructed, but it still has material implications for how people are treated based on how they're perceived, how their bodies are perceived. And even though race is a construct, it has material implications for the kind of healthcare you can access, the kind of jobs you can access, the housing you have, your ability to feel safe, your educational opportunity. There's so many things that are impacted based on racial identity. And you see this really strongly in this book. You see these two sisters with the exact same skin tone, the exact same face, and they're read differently by society. And we find out in this book that and you'll also find this out if you read the book jacket, Stella runs away and tries to pass as white. So she becomes white in essence when she leaves her sister. And because they are read differently by society, they then lead different lives. Their children lead different lives. And this book is a really incredible exploration of that question of what is race, because you have these two sisters. And you see all those things that race impact. And it's really exceptionally done in the novel. And there's a part in the novel where Stella has new neighbors that are black. And this family that is black, their move into the neighborhood causes all kinds of conflict. Neighbors are really concerned. But the father of the family is a famous actor. And it made me think of, there's a Chris Rock bit where he describes his neighborhood, and it's like, I think Oprah lives in his neighborhood, he lives in his neighborhood, he's describing all these other famous black celebrities that live on his neighborhood, and then he mentions the other neighbor who's a dentist. And the piece sort of points to the level of excellence that is required to access what is otherwise accessible to like a much lower level of success for folks who are white. And you see this play out in that novel as well. And there's so many instances like that it's taking what you might have read about in an article, what you may be like reading or hearing in a lecture, and shows you how it's playing out in these characters' lives. The book also shows that race is so fluid because one character is able to pass. And part of the reason she's able to do that, and part of how she maintains that fiction, is how she carries herself. And you hear that also in the piece that I read about Desiree trying to ask for her sister and thinking about the kind of entitled attitude she needs to carry herself with in order for this to work. So the book is showing that, even with two people with the same shade of skin, it's about how you carry yourself, not holding fear, the holding of entitlement that makes the declaration of a racial identity believable. And so what is so crafted for Stella is so natural for her daughter, because she has grown up with this idea that she is white. And This book explores the fluidity of race in a really interesting way, but it also shows those very real ramifications of how you're read and what that means for the rest of your life. Another incredible takeaway of this book is it shows how white supremacy really destroys everyone. There are no winners in this system. So racism is a one-directional thing, but it breaks us all. So the daughter, Stella's daughter, is impacted by her mother's trauma. Stella is impacted by her fear throughout her life. And there are no winners in the system, and it really shows that actually, how patriarchy impacts us all. White supremacy is something that impacts us all, and there's no really winners in this system. Though there are certainly material winners, ultimately it's of the benefit of healthier, more emotionally whole societies for us to address race. The book also does a really interesting exploration of what colorism is. So you have, in the opening chapter, Desiree comes home with her daughter, and so you find out, okay, Desiree's had a child, but the book makes a real point of mentioning over and over again how dark Desiree's daughter is. In contrast to her mother, her daughter is very, very dark. And she experiences a discrimination because of that. She experiences racism, but also in her family, there's this real surprise that she's so dark. And it made me think a lot about colorism, of what the ways to address it are, and that it's not simply a conversation of talking about diverse standards of beauty. It's about addressing also material conditions. It's about addressing the systemic racism that you experience the more melanated your skin is, the darker you are. So in this book, Desiree's daughter's grandmother, so Desiree's mother, is trying to give her skin lightening creams, trying to do all these things to make her skin lighter. And that comes from a place where her husband has been murdered because of the color of his skin. She's experienced discrimination her whole life because of the color of her skin. And she's concerned for her granddaughter and what kind of life she will lead. So it's not simply it's a more complicated conversation of just have a conversation about standards of beauty. It's this book is well, where did this idea of beauty come from, and how do we address both having many different types of beauty and embracing who we are, but also addressing the material conditions that you do experience depending on who you are. I hope that makes sense. But all in all, it's a very nuanced, complex description of colorism and how it exists in families and communities, and what addressing that might look like. My next, reason I think that you should read this is the writing is just stunning. It is elegant and beautiful and subtle, and I'm really excited to read Brit Bennett's other work. She has another book called The Mothers, which I haven't read her first novel, because she is such a deft storyteller and just so masterful. I kept thinking this is not just having a good editor or being a good writer. There's an entire world that the author has created, and I'm in awe of the intellect and the imagination and the heart that produced such a complicated world. I'm very in awe of the author, of her mastery, and has made me really excited to keep writing myself, because it's when you see a master teacher, you feel inspired to pick up a paintbrush yourself. The other thing that I think is really powerful about this book is it is such an incredible description of motherhood and of power dynamics in relationships. And so if you had a spectrum where there is gender violence on one end of the spectrum and total gender equity on the other side of the spectrum, this book explores that spectrum. What does it mean to navigate power and fear and love in your relationships? What does that spectrum even look like? And you see both sisters navigating power and fear in very different ways in their relationships, and also navigate motherhood in very different ways. And so this book is a really powerful exploration of what motherhood is, what relationship is, and how we find wholeness in both. The final thing I would say is this book is really incredible, again, for what I was saying about how fiction writing expands our capacity to empathize, expands our understanding of people's worldviews and perspectives, and for that reason this book is worth reading. There's a character in this book who's a trans man, and I realized reading this that I had never read a book with a trans character in it. I'd read nonfiction things, I've attended lectures, tried to do learning, but I hadn't read a fiction book. And this character, their story, the love story that they're a part of, and the description of the discrimination and the challenges and losses they experience in a world where it isn't always safe, it frequently isn't safe to be who you are, it was really beautifully depicted. And I feel my own capacity to understand and my own understanding of equity expanded through reading this, which I'm very grateful for. So all to say, this is a phenomenal book. It's like not 5 stars, it's not 7 stars, it's 10 stars, it's 12 stars, however many stars you want to give it. It's just a ridiculously good book. And I feel, 2 weeks later, I still feel shook having read it. I'm really excited to engage in dialogue with you about what you thought about the book. And I hope you like it as much as I did. Till next time, this is Shagufta from Seriously Planning. Like, subscribe, share this video if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.